Testing YouTube 1 2 testing.
Good? Okay. All right, we are going to reconvene our meeting. It's now 8 o'clock and we're back to the YouTube channel. Don't you love technology a few days before Friday the 13th? When we are finished with this meeting, the tech department's going to piece together the beginning of it with the Facebook Live piece and the YouTube channel, and we'll get it all out to the community, but hopefully everybody is hearing us and seeing us. So we had just finished reading the consent agenda, and there was no board members did not want any of the 8 items removed from the consent agenda. Dr. Schuler, do you want to share again the information you had regarding the Jefferson PTA?
Yeah, it was a huge thank you to the Jefferson PTA and community group that took on a fundraising effort for the new therapy play space over at Jefferson. The board is accepting a donation a little over $69,000 tonight, which is the first round of donations for that playground project. So again, huge thank you to everybody for the effort. That's all.
Are there any other questions or comments from board members on the consent agenda? All right, I just had one comment. Thank you to Dr. Schuler and the staff on some tweaks I had requested on the letter of intent for the performance contracting services. So I feel comfortable with that letter of intent as presented on the agenda tonight. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Booten, seconded by Mrs. Erickson.
Second.
Mr. Hamlin, can I have a roll, please?
Ms. Booten?
Yes.
Ms. Erickson?
Yes.
Ms. Crabtree?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon? Yes. Mr. Paulson?
Yes. The consent agenda has been approved as presented. Okay, next up on our agenda is the oral reports, which, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the meeting, we moved up before the action items because we know that the community is very interested on our update on the COVID-19 dashboard and update on the 2021 school year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Schuler, and he'll share an update with us, and then we'll do some Q&A board discussion after that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Paulson. So we are here tonight to provide an update for the Board of Education and for the community on our COVID dashboard and our reopening plans, which, waiting on presentation to come up. There we go. So just a couple of comments as presentation is coming up tonight. Again, thank you to the community, and we apologize for the delay in the start of the meeting tonight. We appreciate you staying with us here as we got the meeting back on live on YouTube. I do want to start with a thank you to all of the members of the community, District 200 staff, everybody that's written into the board with feedback on our reopening plans, not just in the last couple of days leading up to this update, but all throughout the process of us updating the community on reopening plans. I can assure the community that the Board of Education has read every message that's come to the board with feedback as probably anticipated or expected. There's been a lot of different feedback, a lot of different thoughts, perspectives that have been communicated to the board and protocols, and so an incredible thank you for everybody. It's without a doubt that navigating through this territory this year has been uncharted, not just for District 200, but I think for every school district in the state of Illinois, and frankly around the country. And we understand without a doubt that every decision that we make comes with impact of that decision. Impact positive, impact negative, and I think that's what's made the discussions at times so difficult and challenging, is that both this board and members of the leadership team understand the impact of each of these decisions that are made, both the impact in terms of our students, an opportunity for our students' impact for our staff, and the safety and well-being certainly of our staff, and impact for our community in terms of our promise to continue to deliver on our educational commitments, certainly to our community. We understand this has been a challenge. And then finally, I just want to close as we launch the update and the presentation tonight with a final thought that as we move forward beyond the pandemic, I think there's been and there will likely continue to be a lot of discussion in the community offering different perspectives on this whole decision around reopening of school. I just remind everybody of the fact that we are a community, and it's incredibly important as we move forward, certainly with the decisions that we have to make tonight, but beyond tonight, that we do have to move forward and continue to heal as a community as we move and navigate through this pandemic. And so just as we get started, a quick reminder of where we are in terms of our current learning plans. At the early childhood, elementary level and transition center, we began our in-person instruction on September the 1st. We launched the virtual academy as a full remote option for our families that selected that option. And then coming up actually on November the 16th, we'll actually begin the transition to trimester number 2. And so as the board knows, our most recent update to the board was about that process and the opportunity for families to reselect their learning modality for the second trimester, which in fact is going to start very shortly. At the middle and high school levels, we began our hybrid in-person opportunity on October 13th, or we began the transition to that model on October the 13th, from September the 1st up to October the 13th. We ran a full remote option. Again, we had a virtual academy as a full remote option for our middle school, and then we introduced the live streaming option as our full remote option for the high school when we began that transition to hybrid on the 13th. So I want to start the update tonight with some county-wide metric updates. So DuPage County has a return to school framework that they update weekly. The board was introduced to this framework a little bit earlier at the end of the summer when it was developed and introduced by DuPage County. What you can see, and you've likely seen if you followed that framework each week, is that it has turned increasingly red within that framework on each of the measures. In the most recent update at the beginning of this week, all of the metrics within that DuPage County Return to School framework are at the substantial level now. So that includes both data around cases per 100,000, the weekly case count trend, weekly youth case count trend, weekly test positivity, our countywide risk metric color from IDPH, and then the regional indicator letter. And it says on here that Region 8 was moved to Tier 1 mitigation. As the board knows, we were just recently moved to Tier 2 mitigations within Region 8. That includes the counties of DuPage and Kane County. And I think also important to note, I want to acknowledge for the board, is that in addition to tracking the countywide data around these metrics, we've tracked zip code specific data. And as of this morning, our zip code specific data is in similar ranges of the county. For a while, we were tracking certainly below the county in terms of our zip code data. We now are tracking very similar, and in some cases a little higher than that county average within our framework. It's also noted, though, within that DuPage County Return to School framework, and we've shared this a couple of times both with the board and the community, that as that framework was developed by the DuPage County Health Department, they did build it with this acknowledgement that DuPage school districts are encouraged to also use individual school level factors such as case and outbreak activity, specific disease trends and distribution, absenteeism among students and staff within a school, the ability of the school to implement key mitigation strategies, and alternate remote learning site options and safety protocols when we're ultimately making the decision about learning models and what students are prioritized for in-person instruction. And so what we're going to go through tonight with the board are a number of those school-level factors that we have relied on as we've evaluated our own internal metrics weekly as the case counts have risen, and we want to give you an update on those factors as we bring to you tonight our recommendations moving forward. And so again, the things that we're going to go through for you are these factors that are identified in the framework, the case and outbreak activity that we've tracked on our own dashboard on our website since September the 1st in our elementary schools and October the 13th at our middle and high school. We're going to share with you some of the specific disease trends and distribution, so any evidence that we found of spread within our schools, our ability to implement those key mitigation efforts, staff absenteeism, student absenteeism, and then our ability to contact trace on confirmed or probable cases within our school. So I'm going to start with the update that comes off of our dashboard. Again, this I know that the board has seen and likely seen updated each week. Each Wednesday, we update this dashboard with the data from the previous week. The reason that we do wait till Wednesday is that sometimes cases that are confirmed at the very beginning of the week or over the weekend, even into Monday, were actually cases from the previous week, and so we've waited till Wednesday to try to make sure that this data is as accurate as it can be. The top line in the chart indicates students that are a positive case, so they've been a positive test. And then the second line are the maximum number of students quarantined on the highest day in the week. So again, I just want to reiterate what this data represents, especially on the second line. Students who are quarantined, staff who are quarantined, are not just quarantined for one day. Often if they are quarantined, it's for a 14-day period of time. But what we've tracked on a daily basis is the maximum number of students that are out on quarantine at any one point in time. This does not indicate that they are necessarily on quarantine as a result of a close contact with another student in the building or staff member in the building. It could also be a quarantine as a result of a family member or a case outside of the school. But again, I think what we're tracking or reflecting in this data point is just general impact of the disease trends in terms of students that are not in the position to come to school and access the in-person learning. And so as you can see from the week of September 1st up to most recent week, we have steadily climbed in terms of some of the numbers, actually held reasonably steady at the elementary level in terms of student cases. But of the week 11-2 to 11-8, more recently we do see an uptick to 15 cases, so a total of 44 elementary cases. You see the quarantine numbers, again, they do rise as the community transmission levels have risen. You see the staff positive cases at the elementary, and then again the staff quarantines as we've gone through. Middle school, what you see for the weeks of September 1st, up through October the 11th is we don't have the student data because students were on full remote instruction at that point, so we're not aware of all positive cases. We do have the staff data at the middle school up through that week of October the 11th, but then you do see the data from the 4 weeks that we've offered our in-person instruction at the middle school. Again, similar trend in terms of uptick in cases and student quarantines, and then a similar trend in terms of staff data. High school, again, you see the data from the last 4 weeks. We have seen an uptick in cases at the high school. So as of the end of last week, we are 42 total cases, 20 student cases from the last week. That quarantine data came up, and then held relatively steady at the high school level, but still up. And then a little uptick in terms of staff cases and staff quarantine data. If we look at that school by school, and I do just want to note with this that we've updated these cases through September the 11th in the AM. So we did have some cases during the day today that are not likely represented in this data, cases that were reported after we updated this slide, but again, just giving you a sense of the case, the data by school. But just one thing that I do want to note in particular, if you go back to the last slide, we were at 42 total cases at our high schools at the end of last week. As of this morning, we were up to 58 cases at our high schools. So that difference in number is just the result of the first 2 days of this week, Monday, Tuesday of this week. And again, those numbers will have gone up after the letters and the cases that went out today. I believe we had another 5 cases identified today at the high school that would be added to that. So again, gives you a sense of where we are by school, including all of our elementary, early childhood center, middle, high school, and our transition center. So in terms of evidence of school transmission, when we do contact tracing on each confirmed case, a confirmed or probable case, we do contact trace to try to determine the source of transmission. So both students or staff that may have been in close contact, but where in fact that transmission is taking place. As we've shared before, to date, all of the linked student cases that we have within our schools have been linked through either family transmission, perhaps multiple students within the same family, or activities outside of the building that have linked cases. So we have not seen evidence specifically of student transmission inside of our building. We have had one case of staff transmission within the school of 2 staff members that were working in a similar program or with a particular student, and we believe we had that case. I do want to mention that the Illinois Department of Public Health has recently started to collect and report some data specifically around transmission. Heard this through the DuPage County Health Department at the beginning of this week, but again, that's still relatively new data, so I do think that the Illinois Department of Public Health is going to continue to report it. We've been doing it up to this point just through our own contact tracing efforts and identification of cases. In terms of staff absences, we do track and share the staff that are required to be out due to quarantine, isolation. So again, just quick clarification of these terms and what they mean. Quarantine is a staff member that is required to quarantine as a result of having been a close contact with either a student or another adult. The teacher doesn't have to necessarily be inside of school. Somebody who is on isolation is a confirmed or a probable case of COVID that's moved on to isolation. We do have some staff that are out due to child care, and I do want to just point out, as of recent, we've seen a little uptick in the child care cases that are not necessarily a result of staff members that are having to take care of a child at home, but the result perhaps of a daycare facility or another facility within the community that's been shut down due to a case of COVID, and so the staff member is out, or staff members that are either awaiting test results themselves or perhaps test results for a family member who's symptomatic. And so what I want to share with you when you look at this data is that we track that weekly, but then also look at it day by day. And so if you go back to the week ending on Halloween or the 31st, we had 60 total staff members that were out due to one of those reasons. I want to point out that as you move from that week of the 31st to the week of November the 7th, not all of those 60 staff members are back the following week if they're on quarantine, if they're on isolation. A number of those cases continue into the following week, but then that week of the 7th, we had 68 additional or new staff members that were out. This week, just through Monday and Tuesday, we have an additional 63 staff members that have been out just in the first couple of days of this week. And so, again, I think as we get through to the end of this week and update that number, most assuredly that 63 is going to be much higher by the end of this week, a number that we haven't seen. And so what does that translate into? Again, by week, when a staff member is out and we're securing a substitute to cover that classroom, for the week of 10/29 through 11/5, when we started to see that uptick, we had 42 unfilled substitute positions. Again, through the first 4 days of this week alone, we're at 86 unfilled substitute positions. So it does not mean that those classrooms are not being covered right now, but it means we don't have a substitute to cover that, and we are either attempting to shift something internally and or especially at the secondary level, we may be utilizing multiple teachers to cover period. Those are positions that were not covered at the front end of the day. And then in terms of student absences, one of the things that I wanted to share and report, I think a trend that we've seen as we've moved certainly through this week and has continued through this week, is that our student attendance rate has kind of steadily dropped down to 72%. I believe it was even a little bit lower than that, certainly at the high school today. And again, I just want to clarify, these are the percentage of students that were signed up for in-person should have been showing up on the hybrid day. So this does not count the 25% of students that are full remote, have always been full remote. These are the students that signed up as a part of the hybrid model, but in fact have not been attending for a variety of reasons that could include quarantine, could include illness, or could include they've simply chosen to stay remote on that particular day or the particular week. And again, that number has steadily gone down. Middle school, it's a little bit better, but we are still seeing an attendance rate that's dropping at the middle school levels. We're down to 78% of the students that are signed up for the hybrid model that are attending. And then at the elementary level, we're tracking that attendance back to the beginning of the school year on 9/1. And again, that attendance rate is tricking down a little bit, but we're still at a 93% attendance rate at the elementary level. And I should mention to the board, as we have made the transition to the second trimester, I believe about 175 students that were in the virtual academy have signed up to come back to the in-person experience. I think we had 15 students that were in person and have gone back to the virtual academy, and that's held pretty steady even as we approach next week.
Just want to catch something on these, the middle school classes, if you can go back one slide. That comment down at the bottom about students that are opting out of, can you comment on that again?
Yeah, so just really in the past week, we've had 53 students that were signed up for the hybrid and have requested to shift to the virtual academy. So again, those numbers separate from the in-person attendance numbers.
Absences, even for staff and for students, are we counting virtual academy in any of these numbers as well? Like, so say we have a...
We're not counting them here, and again, I guess on the staff side, no, not counting them there. We do have some staff members in the virtual academy that have been quarantined or have been positive cases, but what we are tracking here are staff needs, substitute needs for the purpose of our in-person instruction.
Okay, but we do provide substitutes for virtual academy if we need it. Okay.
Yeah, we do. If the staff member is not able to fulfill their instructional responsibilities. In a lot of cases in virtual academy, if a staff member is quarantined, they can still teach and deliver the instruction in the virtual setting, but we have we've hired a permanent sub for the virtual academy to support that need as well.
I want to make sure I
got that right. 175 that were virtual are going in person in elementary,
Correct,
and only 15 that were virtual are going, okay.
correct.
Can I ask a question about the absences? So in high school, the virtual academy or the remote students are in class with the in-person students, but they're just doing it remotely, is that correct?
Did you say at the high school?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes to high school absences, what percentage of these absences are related to quarantine as opposed to someone just deciding, I'd rather be virtual on the day that was expected in class?
Yeah, I don't know that I could tell you that specific breakdown on the data. Obviously, I can go, if you go back to the slides that report the quarantine data, you get a sense of the number of students.
Do we get reports from teachers saying, I was expecting
Yes,
this many students and here's what actually showed up today?
yes, yeah. So we do, the students who are scheduled to show up in person, if they are not showing up in person, that's tracked, right? We track the students that are either by choice or simply for a different reason have not shown up in person. But yes, we do track that information.
And I guess, are we keeping track of who doesn't show up in person and they're just absent versus who doesn't show up in person but they show up on the computer screen? Is that something that's happening?
Yes, yeah, we attempt to, certainly within the schools. So again, what our high schools have done is asked that if a student is just choosing to not attend in person for whatever reason, safety concerns, they've chosen to pursue the virtual only route in that given week. They do ask them to notify so that we can track students that are simply not showing up because they're choosing not to versus they're absent for an illness reason and attending the class. So again, I guess what I want to be clear, Jen, what this data represents. This represents the percentage of students that should have been there in person and did actually show up in person. It could be a compilation of reasons that could include quarantine, could include student choice, or could include they had a symptom and did not come, but that is the percentage of students that should have been in person and actually were there.
And I guess what I'm trying to get at is an understanding of is, do we have an issue with people signing up for in-person but not really taking in-person and choosing for some variety of reasons that they'd rather be at home, safety or not, or is it just seeming convenient to, I'll show up on this computer screen instead of going to school today, and is that a problem for us? And how do teachers feel about that?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that what I've heard from in our high school principal and our high school teams is it's a concern, right? I mean, teachers are planning a lesson based on what they believe to be the number of students that they're going to have in front of them and the number of students that will be joining remotely. And when that shifts significantly, if a teacher is expecting 12 students to be there in person, and actually on that day, there are 3 students that show up to the class and 22 students that show up via Zoom, that does shift the landscape of that lesson for that day, right? What the teacher was planning to do. So yes, I have heard concerns expressed through both of the high schools about that and about the fact that it has been a steady trend or decline in students that are actually showing up for the in-person days.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't mean to open this up I know you wanted to get through the whole presentation, so I'd love for the board members to come back afterwards. I apologize for interjecting on that one point. So you want to continue?
Yep. So contact tracing, got up to contact tracing. So again, we have contact tracing teams at each of our schools, both EC, elementary, and secondary. Just point of note that the contact tracing at the elementary level is really focused on that individual homeroom teacher, since the students are coming into one classroom for that day, any of the transition points, and then if applicable, bus, if they happen to see a specialist, and then obviously there's discussion outside of school. Based on the data, what you'll see is that at this time, typically an elementary contact tracing team may be dealing with or contact tracing for 1 to 2 cases within a single day. At the secondary level, that contact tracing does involve all of the classrooms that the student is attending in that day, extracurricular activities if they've been a part of any of the extracurriculars that are running, again, bus, outside of school pieces. And again, just to note, especially at the first part of this week and the end of last week, there are days where those contact tracing teams have been contact tracing for 3 to 12 cases within a day. And again, our commitment around contact tracing is that we have to be able to complete that contact tracing experience within 24 hours, so that if there are any close contacts, we are identifying and communicating with those families before the next day that the student would be potentially coming into school. So if I give you a summary then of kind of the internal dashboard, and again, this is just color-coded. There are only a couple of numbers on here because only 2 of those individual school factors are quantifiably identified. But I will tell you that as a board, as we work through these school-based factors every week and update this internal dashboard every week, up to last week, we were at a green on each of these indicators. We felt confident in the data. We felt confident in the ability to implement all of our safety mitigation plans. We still haven't had any outbreaks identified within our schools. We have had the 1 case of transmission at the staff level within our schools. Certainly contact tracing, especially as numbers have gone up at the secondary level, has become a concern point for our teams in terms of our ability to execute and carry that out. Certainly, and then staff absenteeism. We talked about that number of unfilled positions, the number of staff that are out. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not blaming staff as we're having this conversation about staff absenteeism. It's a reality. In the same way that we're seeing increasing numbers of students, increasing numbers of community members that are coming into contact with the virus, certainly at the staff level, we've been clear, if you have a symptom, remember, if your family has a symptom, you need to stay home and pursue testing until verified that that's not a COVID symptom. And so people are doing what they need to do. Those numbers have simply increased, which creates an issue in terms of both staffing and our ability to sub. So our recommendation, and I want to say clearly that I have been proud of the opportunities that we've been able to continue to provide and bring to our community, and so I don't arrive at this recommendation for the board lightly by any stretch of the imagination, but we are recommending to the board tonight that we implement an adaptive pause at our middle and our high schools. That adaptive pause at the middle and high school would begin on Monday of this upcoming week, so we would begin the adaptive pause on Monday. What I'm recommending to the board is that we review the status of that adaptive pause at your board meeting on December the 9th. We've got 1 more week of school leading into our Thanksgiving break. I think as we come out of Thanksgiving break, it's important that we continue that adaptive pause post Thanksgiving break and then see where we're at on December the 9th in terms of being able to potentially update our status. I don't think there's any surprise or mystery that there is a lot of concern about what's going to happen in terms of virus transmission between Thanksgiving and the winter break time, and so our recommendation is that we continue that adaptive pause on December for the board and community in terms of where we are, with potentially a recommendation from there. We are recommending that we continue with our in-person learning experience at the elementary level, early childhood center, transition center, and in our specialized instructional programs. So those are instructional special education programs that did begin the year in person and have been in person, and we are recommending that we continue with that in-person experience. I want to mention to the board, though, even when we talk about our elementary programs, that we have done this analysis of the dashboard that I just walked through on a weekly basis, and we're going to need to continue to do that. Well, I continue to feel confident in our ability to continue with our elementary, our early childhood, and our transition programs. I think as the community data does continue to increase, we need to evaluate that on a weekly basis and make sure that we are ready should we need to take an adaptive pause even at the elementary level. What we've talked certainly about as a leadership team and with our elementary principals is that our goal is, if we arrive at a point where we need to take an adaptive pause at the elementary level, especially because we have been in person since the beginning of the school year, our goal would be to give the community a week's notice of the need for that adaptive pause so that families do have an opportunity to make plans for that adjustment if they're going to be supporting their young children at home. One last piece that I want to just point out is kind of a caveat to that piece is recognize that statewide, well, the mitigation efforts have been put in place by regions, have been mitigation efforts that have not applied directly to schools. Should we arrive at a point that the whole state moves back into phase 3 of the reopen plan based on statewide data, that third phase of the reopen plan would revert us to full remote as a school district, and that may come without a week's worth of warning. So again, while I'm stating that if we arrive at a recommendation to revert to remote or take an adaptive pause at the elementary level, we would prefer to give the community a week's notice to prepare. I'm just pointing out that decision, if it's made at a state level, may not come with that week's worth of notice. And then just 3 additional points of information that I want to share is that the recommendation of our teams is that as we resume that remote instruction at the high school and middle school, we are recommending that we follow the same remote learning schedule that was in place at the start of this school year at the middle and high school. Families of students from middle and high school, again, that are in the specialized instructional programs that were in person at the start of the year, will continue on the same schedule they started the school year with, and our students in the transition program would follow the same schedule that they used to start the school year. And I think that is all that I have in terms of slides with our recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that board members have.
All right. Anybody want to? We had a couple questions in the middle, but anybody want to? We'll just go around the room, left to right, I guess. For me, Rob.
Yes, with the current recommendation, does that address our unfilled substitute positions numbers?
Yeah, so it does in a couple of ways, Mr. Hanlon. One is that any of our permanent substitute positions at the secondary level would be available to support our elementary positions. So like we had at the beginning of the year, you might remember as we started the year with the in-person model at the elementary level, one of the advantages that I think we identified board with the ability to utilize resources from our secondary schools to make sure we were fully covered in terms of the staff, and so I believe that will help us in the short term. Again, obviously, as numbers continue to potentially climb, I can't promise that's a permanent solution, but I do believe it will help in the short term.
Susan?
Thank you, first of all, for the update, and just in general, thank you for your leadership through this process. And having sat on the reopening team from the beginning, I know how hard you and your team have worked, and I just want you to know I greatly appreciate that. And you've taken a lot of fire from our community over the past several months, and I apologize for that as a representative of the community. I don't think you deserve that, and I think you've done a great job, so thank you. I agree completely with the middle school and high school going to remote starting Monday. I'll be honest, I am concerned about elementary with the numbers rising as fast as they are. I just did some math that, in the last 30 days, the number of cases has increased over 200%, and our cases per 100,000 is at 312 when the target is 50. And obviously these numbers are trending quickly and rising, and I just feel like, it saddens me to say that, but I just feel like the numbers are rising too fast. And I see the data, and I see what you're saying about the transmission in the school, and I do think we need to give our parents notice, a proper notice, but with the holidays coming up and knowing what is going on in our community, I know what I've seen and what other people have seen, that, I think people are going to gather for Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, and I just have concern about keeping elementary and knowing those numbers are going to continue to climb, and that maybe we say, okay, go till Thanksgiving break, for elementary and stay in next week, but I kind of have a hard time keeping them in after the break and going through the holidays. So I think that's my overall thought, is that it just, just the way the numbers are trending, it just doesn't seem like the right thing to do right now for our students and our staff.
Can you give me an estimate, and I should know, but I don't know, how many elementary school students we have currently enrolled, roughly?
I can, yes. Just a second.
Seem to recall 3,700 or something like that.
Thought I had it on the slide. You know what? I've got it on the, I think identified on the dashboard. I'm
About, Chris might know.
Oh, here he is. Yes. 3,869.
Thank you. So my point is, while I'm respecting Susan's point of view, it's 15 out of 3,000. So I'm just trying to offset the 200% increase, because I agree if you do the math, it's right, but it's relatively speaking percentage-wise.
Okay. Dave, any thoughts or comments?
First, I want to clarify something, or just understand a little better on the staff absences. These numbers of 62 weeks ago and 68 last week. For quarantine, isolation, childcare, that's a good bit higher than what's showing up on the highest day of quarantine
Yes,
on the dashboard, and the dashboard is just quarantine.
correct. So the staff absences, so just take today alone, right? There are potentially 4 reasons why a staff member might be out. They're on quarantine, right? They were a close contact, they're on quarantine, they're a positive case, confirmed or a probable case, and so they're on isolation. They're out for a childcare reason, or they're out because they have reported in either, I have a symptom, so I woke up with a headache, a fever, runny nose, a cough, or I have a child, a spouse, a significant other that has a symptom, and so I'm either going for testing or I'm taking child or significant other for testing. So this staff absences are just any reason why a staff member is out. So that's the net impact in terms of classroom teachers or teachers that are not there. The quarantine number are just the staff members who are specifically out on quarantine. And so, again, some percentage of the 63 staff members from Monday or Tuesday of this week, some percentage of them are going to go for testing be a negative test and then come back into the classroom. It might be 2 or 3 or 4 days later, depending on how long it takes for a test. The other thing I should mention, in the most recent IDPH decision tree, it used to be that the rapid test was accepted, and so with the rapid test, an individual could go, get tested, get a test result much more quickly to be back at school or back in the classroom. What I'm seeing now in terms of the testing is that some of the test results can take 3 to 4 days. So if a staff member's out with a symptom, they may be out for 3 or 4 days, or they get the negative result and are able to provide that data and come back in. So does that make sense, Dave? So this is a combination of all of the reasons why an individual is out, which is going to be higher than just staff who are quarantined.
He's out for the whole week, and like last week, there were 68.
Mhm.
Is that 1 or is that 5?
1.
Okay,
Yeah, those are individuals.
yeah. So I'm just trying to correlate, what's on the dashboard, and really, so in terms of the quarantine on the dashboard, we're not, there's a good bit more, almost almost as many, if I did
Yeah,
the math right.
the quarantine, my view, quarantine on the dashboard gives you an indicator of
Yeah, what's
disease
happening-
activity.
What's happening with
Right,
disease,
like
yeah.
what's happening in terms of disease activity. The true picture of staff absences and the impact on our ability to cover classrooms is what's identified on this slide, right? Because it's capturing all of the potential reasons why an individual might be out. And again, when a staff member is out, that could be anything from 3 days, 2 days, if it's a symptom and they're going to get a test result and coming back. It could be as much as 24 days if they are with a family member who's isolated or who are on isolation and then have to run a quarantine window at the end of that.
Another question, this really came from something I read in an email. If my child is in a classroom and there is a positive case in that classroom, I have a junior at North, so I get a lot of notes from Mr. Biskin about number of cases. And I don't know if the answer to this question would be different by level, but so maybe just start at elementary. If there is a positive case in a classroom, do the families of the other kids in that classroom get notified?
They do.
And that's what I thought, and I know there was a note that indicated they didn't.
Right.
Does that go all the way up through high school?
No, that goes through elementary
Yep,
school.
because of
At
the-
middle
because
and
of the
high
change of
school, we've been
classes.
doing building notification, and I will tell you a couple of reasons for that. Not that we're not trying to be transparent, and I think we had somebody that sent in a note questioning that. At an elementary level, it's easier to send that notification and say, hey, to the parents of Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so's class. At the high school, if you have 2 children at the high school, right, and we just send a note saying this is to notify you that a student in your child's class, well, which class, which student? There's so many variables that I don't think that helps in terms of streamlining communication. And as what we've said is that recognize that those notifications only go out after the contact tracing has been done. So if your child is a close contact of an individual, that notification is happening right away. And so truly the letters are not about contact tracing. They're really just about transparency and us sharing when we have cases, which that was our intent to communicate. There are some school districts that don't send notification letters out at all. You're not actually required to do that. You're required to contact trace. We just wanted to make sure we're fully transparent whenever we have cases. I think the net impact of that, though, I just mention is that and I've heard this, especially this week, right, as we've had some situations where, we've had a building with 13 cases. Parents are getting, number one, you're getting daily notifications and daily notifications with multiple cases. And so I think certainly that's increasing anxiety, without a doubt.
Okay, thank you. On the elementary school topic, you know, I guess, I don't know if I'm struggling with it, but I'm still wrestling with that in my mind, just in terms of why are we keeping elementary in? And I know they have the shortened day and they're not eating lunches in school and so forth. And I know the numbers are a little bit lower. But I guess maybe I'm interested in the rationale, because it doesn't look on the surface, and maybe it's the proportion of the numbers, but it doesn't look like middle school is that much worse than elementary. So why the distinction? You know, like, did we consider just closing high school, or not closing, but going remote in high school and leaving middle school in person like elementary, or are they lumped together? Or maybe just a little bit about the rationale of why the three different levels are being treated the way they are, or recommended.
They're not lumped together, so we looked at each of the levels independently. I think the reality is the secondary models are very similar, right? So the model at the middle school, very similar to the model at the high school. Less students in the middle school on a daily basis, but you still have the movement, you still have lunch inside of the building. I think you have more points of contact. And so, again, I know that there's a definitive answer to this, but what I can tell you is certainly from the DuPage County Health Department and their framework is that their framework has not said simply because you're at the substantial level you cannot conduct in person. But the higher you are in terms of community transmission, the more you have to be cognizant of the modality of instruction, right? The amount of movement, the amount of opportunity for kids to come into contact both with each other and with adults. And the reality is that's different at the elementary building. They're there for 4 hours. There isn't a lunch. They're into their classroom. They're out of their classroom and on the way home.
Okay. Well, I think that helps. I just want to make sure, because I think the one thing, and when we're having these discussions, it seldom comes up in terms of, I mean, it does, but in terms of the social and emotional part of it. I mean, I have a junior. I'd much rather have her staying in school, even now with the numbers as they are, just because of the difference I see the last 4 weeks compared to the previous 4 weeks. But I get it. But still, there's that one piece, especially for those who feel very strongly that we are being irresponsible sending kids to school. But, I mean, we had the data in the committee of the whole meeting of how many hospitalizations and so forth, so I think it's really important to emphasize that it's all being considered. And I just have one more question, and that's about the scheduling. Because we changed even, I know the remote plan's a little different, but the plan they're going back to is, and this is specific to, well, the ones that are going remote, shorter schedule, shorter periods. Was there any thought, or is it because of the staffing and teacher prep that we would keep the same schedule, the bell schedule that we have today, as opposed to the, abbreviated classes and longer asynchronous at the beginning and end of the day?
Yeah, so a couple of things that tie to that, Dave. Number one, recognize that while the class periods are shorter, it is 5 days a week of synchronous online instruction. And so right now, certainly at the middle school level in terms of the in-person longer periods, but you have several days that are asynchronous. Our feedback from the teachers that developed that schedule not only over the summer, but reviewed the schedule even after we came back in person to really evaluate what made the most sense for students, and they got a lot of feedback from students. And what I will tell you around the schedule is that how you view the schedule is very much driven by kind of individual students and perhaps where they are in terms of their educational experience. And I've heard feedback a lot of different directions, from I need the full class periods, I need the time based on the rigor in my courses that I'm taking, to I've heard a lot of feedback that full day on Zoom is just too much in terms of like screen time, especially if it's 5 days consecutive. And so that was an element of balance. The other piece, Dave, is that our teachers felt very strongly about that opportunity to have daily points where they could interact with students outside of the class to provide support, to be able to answer questions, interact. And while I know that this is not happening universally across every student, the feedback that I've heard from our teams and our teachers, that students were taking advantage of those daily opportunities. And so if you run a full synchronous bell schedule, those opportunities are really limited if you're just running the one asynchronous Wednesday day, not kind of a daily opportunity for students to get support, or for teachers to proactively reach out to provide support for students who are struggling.
Sense, thank you. And just, I know I said that was my last one. Back to this 175 elementary going from virtual to hybrid. When did they make that decision?
Mr. Slaggy, when you communicated that option for families when?
We communicated the option out to families to transfer back.
Yes.
On October 15th is when it opened up. They could make the decision by October 20th, and then we spent between October 20th all the way up till November 5th in communication with families after that to give them, talk to, here, you can come back to your home building, here's an option maybe at another building, all those different pieces.
That number really kind of surprised me, and it is an indication that, by and large, the community does want their kids in school. Right now, I know the numbers have spiked a little bit since then, but they are already spiking at that point, so.
Yeah, and the final piece of it, the principals then made calls last week and this week to confirm with parents, right?
Okay.
And that they're coming back, and they have. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I've got a couple of items. I heard today that the state is encouraging all employers, the Illinois Department of Health or whatever, is encouraging all employers and employees to stay at home until we get ahead of this thing. So with that in mind, I just, as background. But one of the things that I'm looking at here, when I look at elementary, and I look at the number of, I guess the number that's key to me is the maximum number of students quarantined in a day. That number on each of the categories. And then if I divide that by the number of students that are in class, it seems like almost every one of them is about 2.5%. Okay? So I'm not seeing the distinction between elementary, middle school, and high school. And, therefore, I'm not quite sure why we're saying, and I understand the classroom movement and all that, but the statistics are basically saying it's 2.5%. And I think the biggest concern I have is when we're addressing this now and we're saying we're not going to offer, it's going to be all virtual on middle and high, we've now removed one other big thing, and that's choice. And that's something that we've been offering since day one. And the high school, the enrollment in the 1 week dropped from, actually, if I go back to November 15th or 5th, it was 73%, and this week it's 72%. So, there was that 1 week in between that was really higher at 79%. So I'm just confused a little bit about, why we're removing the choice, okay? And if it's staffing or something like that, it's just different, I understand that. But, just merely if we, on one hand, if we go back to what I started with, the state wants us to, or is suggesting employers to do the following, to me that means we should shut down totally. But schools are exempt from that, for whatever reason, whatever that is. But then I go to the other side and I'm saying, okay, we're seeing the same occurrences, it seems to me, in middle, high, and elementary. So I'm confused why we're only closing those two down. And then again, we're removing the choice. I'd like to personally see us go another week. It's 1 week now between now and Thanksgiving. And I just soon go another week and then stop because we have a full week off. And who knows what will happen. I just feel that if we stop, it's going to be a long time before we go back. We're not going to get good data from the week that we're closed next week. We're not going to get any data for the week that we're closed because of Thanksgiving. And so now we're, what was it, the 9th board meeting, we'll have 1 week of data, and, I don't know how reliable that will be in a sense, or why it will cause us to change something. So I guess fundamentally I'm saying, okay, why not keep that choice available for another week? And then, we'll be out for a week. And then at that point, if we see a lot of, parents or, things can change. Things have changed a lot in the weeks, just the data from the, from the state is changing day by day. And it's getting worse, I understand that. But I think, in certain respects, I feel like we should either shut it down all, or we should go back or keep it for another week and just kind of, let it happen, be gone the week after, and then decide what we want to do on December 9th or some other point. So I just think I'm not quite clear why it's so important that we make that decision tonight about next week. That's my comment.
All right, so I'm still having trouble wrapping my brain around the high school absences. If a student is quarantining, I guess, question number one, do they just join the virtual audience and they're still getting educated
Correct.
and doing the same thing? Do the teachers have to keep track of who's quarantining and treat them as if they're a child who's out sick and do something different, or do they just keep on teaching and it's just that many more kids at home as opposed to in the building?
Correct.
Okay. And so these numbers for anywhere from 73 to 79% of the students are present. If they're not present, I'm still having trouble understanding whether we're capturing more of the percentage of kids because they're not present in the classroom, but they are on the screen somewhere. So that's my first question is, do we have just huge numbers of absences, or are they just changing where they're doing their education? So that's question number one. And the other one is, when I look at how low these numbers are, especially compared to elementary school, are they home because their parents or these families are losing confidence in the in-person situation? Is this some sort of indication to us? They don't want to be in person? Are we getting that kind of feedback? Is anybody telling us what this means when they don't show up?
Yeah, so again, what I will tell you based on feedback from both of the high school principals is that families are selecting to not come, so they are getting notification from some families that parents have simply made that choice for their students, and in some cases, the students are just choosing to stay remote. So I don't have in this a clean breakdown for you of exactly what's causing it, but I will tell you without a doubt, both high schools have reported that there is a daily downward trend in terms of those who are showing up for in-person instruction. I will also tell you, even anecdotally, that, if you want a marker of it, the amount of time that it takes you to get through the traffic drop-off to drop your kids off has notably changed. In the morning, there are less people coming to the in-person opportunity. Again, that is likely a combination of more students who are out or quarantined, some that are just choosing that route, or it could be just in some instances it could be just a student who's not choosing to come, but the trend in what's been shared is there's been a notable daily drop in the number of students that are showing up for the in-person hybrid option.
I have two teacher questions. The first is related to that, which is this creating more work or nightmares for our teachers to keep track of who's where and who am I teaching and who's sick, and is that a problem? And secondly, is the percentage of absences of teachers causing us a problem? With the numbers on unfilled substitute positions, those look like big numbers to me, but I don't know how they're spread across the building. So are we reaching any kind of critical, we can't get enough teachers in there to keep moving anyway?
Yes, that is the implication of that data in terms of the staff absence. If we can't staff classrooms, we've got problems. I will tell you, we're seeing that much more at the secondary level in terms of the unfilled positions than we are the elementary levels. So that is the implication of that data. To your first question, in terms of the teacher piece, again, there is probably somewhat of a nuanced answer, right? We asked teachers, as we asked them to take on this live streaming option or opportunity, right, which was not part of our original hybrid plan. It became part of the hybrid plan as we made the transition back. That is a new instructional modality, right, where you're working with multiple audiences, both students that are in front of you, students that are online. So, you know, if you as a teacher know that you've got about 12 kids in front of you, 12 students online, you plan a lesson based on how that experience is going to interact. If 2 of those students don't show up, right, to where the balance is maybe shifted by 2, is that hugely impactful in terms of the lesson? I don't know. I think if you had teachers here, they would likely give you a very honest perspective on that. But when it shifts to where you might be expecting 10 students and only 3 show up in person, and then 20 are online, that does impact what you were planning to do in terms of the in-person and the online opportunity. And I have heard that clearly, that again, if you know, you plan for the lesson. If you don't know that, and you get to third period, and that dramatic shift has happened, that does create, I think, an immediate challenge for a teacher to try to readjust to that experience, right? So I think, you know, having some degree of kind of planned experience of who's showing up and in what format is important in terms of the teacher's ability to lesson plan.
Right. Okay. So another teacher question. I know that you told us early on that there would be some teachers who would be teaching remotely with a placeholder, essentially adult in the classroom, teaching kids who are in person. If a teacher is out because they're quarantining or isolating, are they, some percentage of them teaching from home and doing that same thing, or they're not sick enough that they can't be teaching, but they're teaching, and then are we hiring a substitute to be that placeholder person?
Yes.
As opposed to being a teacher person?
Yeah, that's happening quite a bit, where a teacher's out is still teaching. In all of those circumstances, though, we do still have to put an adult in the classroom, right?
And what are we doing with 86 places where there's no substitute? It's hard to picture what that actually means.
Yeah, so you're either, we're pulling somebody from a different position, so it might be that you're pulling somebody who's a specialist who then is not going to see students that they may have been pulling out for some type of specialized service on that particular day. Other teachers are simply picking up those classes in their plan or lunch period that they're covering those classes. So in other words, maybe a teacher schedule of 6 classes is cobbled together with 6 internal subs. So when you don't have a sub or it's unfilled, you're just pulling from somewhere else. Could be a building principal that's stepping in to sub for a class, or another administrator or department chair, or another individual in the building that's having to step in and leave their duties to do that.
Okay, because even in normal times, non-COVID world, I feel like we've been hearing over the last few years, particularly at the high school level, that there's a daily call for somebody on the normal staff to come cover somebody else's classroom for some number of hours of a day because they can't find subs. So is that the same thing we've got going on? Is it worse than in normal times?
Yeah, fair question. So as we looked at the unfilled positions, Dr. Kyle also compared that to same point in time for a year ago. It is markedly higher. So that is an issue that we've dealt with. I don't want to say we've never had a substitute shortage. I think that's been acknowledged and shared with the board before, but it is notably higher. I wouldn't be bringing it to you as a concern
Right.
if it was not a concern in terms of our ability to still put people in classrooms.
Okay.
Is that alleviated by going to full remote at middle school and high school? I would think that would be the same issue whether we're remote or in person.
Jim, I think only if somebody is really not able to teach. So it doesn't alleviate perhaps a situation of somebody who is confirmed positive with symptoms to the point that they can't teach. But again, likely it does alleviate the circumstances where I may wake up with a symptom, but I'm still okay to teach, perhaps in a non-COVID experience.
Okay.
I'm
That's not a driving force, though, to go to total
remote.
remote. Thank you.
Yeah, it alleviates the staffing
Okay.
piece,
All right.
without a doubt.
Okay.
Okay, and a final question on the staffing. Would it be fair to say that if in non-COVID times it was stressful for teachers to feel like they had to cover, or were being asked a lot to cover somebody else's classroom, I feel like we've been hearing all this year so far that our teachers are going above and beyond, are being really stressed just to deliver their normal content this year. I would expect it to be a much higher stressor to also have to cover all these extra absences. So are we hearing from our teachers
Yes.
that they're struggling?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a few comments and questions. I feel a frustration that, I look at, we have a DuPage County school metrics dashboard that says we're at substantial risk. Yet today, IDPH came out with, they want, somewhat of a non-official shelter in place for the next 3 weeks. So specifically, so schools and businesses can stay open. And so I feel like we're getting mixed messages, and I know that's not anything with our district in general. I'm just frustrated at the state level with what we're getting here and not getting the support that we need to be able to stay open. So I just wanted to say that. And then I have a couple of just comments. I respect all the work that has gone into this, the teams that are working. I look at the bell schedule. We received so much feedback the last time from Virtual Academy middle school families that we changed the bell schedule, and now we're changing it again. And if we go back in person, we're going to change it again. And I can't help but think, especially the families with sixth graders, where parents have had to make adjustments in their work and life schedules because we are now starting later again. And then if we go back to, we're going to have to start early again. I just feel like we need to come up with something to be able to have consistency there. And I understand, I'm somebody who sits on Zoom calls the majority of my day. I know it's a very difficult thing, but I think we need to think creatively as well so that we can keep a consistent schedule. Maybe they're not on that entire time. But I also, have gotten quite a bit of feedback from middle school families about the asynchronous. We have our elementary in 5 days a week. We have our middle school, even if they're home, live streamed 4 days a week. But our middle schools aren't quite there. So I guess a challenge that, I'm thinking about as we look to reopen again, are we looking at what worked really well from this experience, what didn't work quite well. If we're going to open back up again, are we best in opening in this exact same hybrid model, or should we be looking at another thing? Like, should we be looking at half days where we're not having as much commingling, or block scheduling? I know it's a lot of work to ask, but if it can get kids back in school quicker, I wasn't at the committee of the whole, but I watched it, and it's really stuck with me, the social and emotional struggles that our students are facing. The fact that our hospitalizations are up, I think it was 100%, you said, from last year at this time. That's just what we know. There are so many others out there that we don't know. And we know that when kids are back, Dave shared about his own family, the difference, that's what we hear in all of these letters, the difference in their kids when they're back at school. And so if hybrid, by being there all day long, and all the commingling that's happening and lunch is too much for us to sustain, then I would really like us to put some effort and emphasis on, is there a different solution that could be better? And then my question in regards to that is, what are the metrics that's going to open us back up again when we shut down? Like, what is that going to look like? Do we have that plan? I also am concerned we're waiting for now till the 9th to talk about it again, which is 4 weeks away. And I understand. I'm guessing it's going to continue to rise for the entire month of December. But should we be having a weekly checkpoint, whereas every Wednesday we look at the information again, and based upon whatever that criteria is, that's what we use to open up again. I'm going to just keep going through all my things, and then I know some of these are too big for you to even consider answering tonight. They're just things that I'm thinking about. The other thing is are there additional mitigation procedures that we could be putting in place to help keep kids in school? Could we be doing, I know you went and listened to, I think it was, I don't know if it was Glen Ellen, one of the Glen Ellen districts maybe, that is looking at doing a saliva test. I know there are other districts that are doing that to help. Are there other mitigation pieces that we can have in place so that we can continue to provide in person to keep it safe for our students and our staff as well? So are there different things, like, I guess it's, what are some of those things that we're thinking about to try to get us back open again? Like, what would that look like? That's my biggest question is if we shut these down, and I'm kind of with Jim, like, what is that 1 week? But if we shut these down, what is going to get us back?
So I guess the one thing that I would give you in the immediate is we need to see the trend turn the other direction, right? I mean, we are watching a steep climb in terms of the community data, and I have a hard time, Chris, not assuming that the experience we're seeing in terms of cases and activity in our schools, I have a hard time not seeing it connected to kind of the broader issue, right, in terms of data. You're right. The reality is, once we are on remote, we're not going to see cases in our schools because we don't have kids, right, in our schools. But I think assuredly we're going to have to see that trend begin to flatten out and turn the other direction to feel like we're now in the other direction, right? So I think that my view would be step one. And then I think to your point on, we know we have mitigation strategies that have been in play as a part of our current plan. Can we look at additional opportunities that might help us to feel comfortable if the trend is turning and starting to come back down, but not totally down into, the moderate level on the DuPage County dashboard, but that we'd still feel comfortable with that? I think we can have conversation about other mitigation factors like surveillance testing, right? That there are a couple of different versions that are out there. The state has started to look at one version of a saliva surveillance test that could certainly be utilized. So I think we can look at a few of those opportunities. But I don't have an immediate answer for you. I'm sharing with you tonight the reasons why I'm uncomfortable with us continuing in the current model that we're in. But what turns that around and gets us back, I think, one, we need to see the trend turn around.
And so I guess that's a pledge out to the community right now. We're looking at, for the community, for transfer to lessen there before we can bring back. And I just want to circle back again just to middle school, because I feel like we've got this live stream option at the high school level. Are we considering that for just to get more synchronous opportunities for our middle school students? Because I feel like that is our area that when we're in that, when we're in the hybrid model, where we have the least amount of actual synchronous contact time. You know, is it a cost factor? Is it more it's just not developmentally age appropriate? You know, we've done it at high school. Are we finding it to be, you know, something that's beneficial? Should we be looking at that expense at the middle school?
Yeah. So I think fair question. Again, I guess what I would say in fairness to the question now, we have not been actively exploring that, because up until yesterday, right, or even up through today, we're still in the hybrid piece. As we step back, assuming the board supports the recommendation tonight, as we did with the full remote experience, when we came off the full remote experience and moved into the hybrid, our teams certainly reflected on our success in the first round of remote and what worked and what didn't work, and you know, what considerations need to be at play moving forward. I think we'll do the same thing with the hybrid, right? And I think you've highlighted some of what our concerns with the live streaming, but we also heard concerns with that. So yes, it does help in terms of synchronous opportunity, but I don't want to paint a picture that was the perfect option of hybrid. We had teachers that indicated that was a struggle as well. So in fairness to it, I think we obviously need to reflect on and study. That's something we can absolutely do as we're planning forward.
I guess what I'm saying is I just want us to think out of the box as much as possible, and if that means even we have to shift to a different model when we come back after the holidays or whatever it is, whatever is going to give our students the best opportunity to have some in-person instruction that's safe for our staff and our students.
Yep, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. Yeah, I just want to be, I want to be fair to the team. Please don't assume that we're not thinking outside of the box regularly as we're trying to develop solutions. But I will also just mention that with each opportunity to think outside of the box and change, that's a new instructional modality that's coming at the system as well. And so it's this constant balance of trying to figure out what can we do to get better, but what can we do to provide some consistency to the system itself, right? You've mentioned from the parent perspective how you've heard feedback from parents just saying, like, give us consistency. But you do hear the same thing from staff as well, right? That the landscape can't constantly shift underneath them of, hey, we're doing it this way now, we're doing it this way now, we're doing it this way, like, you know. So we are thinking outside of the box, and I don't want to suggest for a second that we're not willing to continue to think creatively about how it is that, right, we can return to that hybrid experience, but we just have to do that with an eye on, you know, the stability of the system as well.
Can I back up and ask for clarification? Can you define the term surveillance testing?
Yeah, so surveillance testing or saliva testing is just, it's like a mass testing protocol where on a weekly basis, you'd be testing students for either antigens or for a sense of some of the viral load that they might be carrying. So it's a way to potentially identify especially asymptomatic students or staff that may be carrying a viral load that could spread. So there are a number of different protocols and processes that are out there. You know, candidly, our health department has kind of varying degrees of comfort with some of the different protocols that are out there, but I had an opportunity a week ago to listen to Glen Ellen 41. Their school board is looking at a surveillance testing opportunity as they look forward. I think New Trier High School is looking at something similar. So it's a mass testing protocol that would allow you to identify students who may be symptomatic or asymptomatic but are carrying a viral load. Again, depending on the testing, some of them can actually produce a test result. Some of them just produce an indicator that would say, hey, Jim, now you need to go get a test, right? The indicator suggested we need to basically pull you out of the school environment until you go get a test, but it's just a way to try to pick up potentially asymptomatic positive students before they're in a position where perhaps they're a spreader.
Okay, and I would be interested in what my colleagues feel about that too. If there's any chance that you're going to filter out some people who may be asymptomatic, who maybe need to be tested some more, if that's going to make our community feel better about the community transmission that they perceive might be coming from our schools, I think that's important. I also think that, you know, we hear that kids don't get it as much or don't suffer from it as much. If they do, maybe don't know they have it, and I get totally lost in all the data about whether kids are transmitting it to adults. But I know there's asymptomatic transmission going on in this world, and if there's any way that we can be a little bit more proactive to not be doing that to our community, I feel very strongly that I want to know what are options there, and I want to know what all the rest of you guys think about that. And secondly, I feel like anecdotally we are hearing, well, I'll start with the good news. From what I've heard, from what I know of what's going on at Jefferson, our early learners, I feel like those teachers are amazing at figuring out how to move their kids around in a way that they can deliver the program, and they are not having a spread. They're keeping their kids apart, and I have heard over and over again how wonderful our earliest learners are doing, keeping their masks on without any question. So I love the success that's going on there. I like that you are keeping them in school, even if we feel the need to pull back the older kids, because my sense is the teachers are less concerned than maybe they were when they started the year about being in any kind of danger for being in school, and that the kids are following along. And it's disappointing to me that we're hearing anecdotally that it's our older students or families out there who are not following the protocols we'd like them to in the community, because we keep hearing we're not transmitting this disease in our schools, and yet the numbers are going up in our community. So if it's not happening in our schools, it's happening at the parties and the gatherings and whatnot. So I still feel like we either have to test and know that it's here, or we have to really come down harder, and I don't know how we do that, on people who are not following the protocols that would allow us to keep the kids back in school.
Yeah. Or both. I don't think it's an either or. I think
Right.
even with the increase. So again, the way that I heard or saw the surveillance model described, right? You kind of think about a block of Swiss cheese, right? That's got little holes through it, right? And you have all these mitigation strategies that are put in place to kind of plug your vulnerabilities, right? Your holes in the model. So whether it's mask, physical distancing, surveillance testing is one more layer that goes in there that attempts to put one more barrier to keep, you know, the virus from coming through. Because the reality is, if the virus is here, there's always a possibility that it finds its way through, right? Even if people are putting in place all of the right mitigation strategies, you cannot completely eliminate the risk. So if every in-person opportunity we have to acknowledge there is risk that's associated with it if the virus is around us. I think the more it's around us, the more potential, risk that sits there. But obviously, if you've got these mitigation protocols, the goal is to be able to put enough of them in play to kind of plug up all the vulnerabilities, right, where it might get through. And I think surveillance testing is one more of those opportunities. But again, certainly, as we're learning more about it, I would be happy to bring to the board at your next meeting a presentation or an understanding of what surveillance testing is. It's not cheap. It's definitely going to come with a cost, but as other mitigation strategies or efforts have, but I'd be happy to bring that to the board.
I think that, doing that step is, we basically said, when we had the choice back in, earlier in the month about the number of students coming back from virtual academy and so on, the parents aren't seemingly concerned about that. Maybe times are changing now, and we're talking about community changes, and community changes, realistically, they're happening almost the same percentage in elementary as they are in high school. So I keep going back, and I think it's very important we have the in-person, particularly at the younger levels, but I'm confused why we're backing away at the high school and in the middle school for that reason. If it's a community-based, it is, but we're finding from our statistics that it's not being caused by the school. Okay, and if it is caused by the school, then, why would it be different in high school or middle school? And I understand the room separation and so on, but these percentages don't bear that out, the data. So I'm disappointed that we're considering going, fully remote again at the two other schools, maybe middle school. I think the high school kids can work more independently. And I understand the elementary kids being in school, but when I say, okay, they're in school, why shouldn't the other ones? And we still have that choice. And even with the example of the teacher having students, 12 versus 3, well, we're not seeing 12 versus 3, we're seeing 12 versus 10, or the 70% rule and so on. So it's not that extreme yet. And maybe the extreme will happen, but, I feel like we're really, we're getting ahead of this. And I know the stats are showing what they are, but they're no different in elementary. So, whatever. It's troubling to me.
I see that a little bit differently. I understand what you're saying, Jim. But I guess I have a child that's 7. And Jim, to your point, I'll be honest, I kept him home today. Because getting that letter of 13 kids in one day and then 5 days the next day, and I'm on the 14th. It is nothing what the district has done. Dr. Shua, I don't think this plan has failed. I think these mitigation strategies have been exceptional, and I think we've gone above and beyond. And my frustration, to your point also, is that our community has wanted this so badly, but we know it's coming from the outside, and so, thank you. And so it's very frustrating to me that we've worked so hard to make this work, and yet our community is not helping us achieve that goal of keeping our students in school. And that, you've always said we can get kids in school. It's keeping them in school that's the issue.
Well, and I would say that even if we're not transmitting it within the schools, which I think is fabulous, if it's being transmitted and people are either coming down with the disease or having to quarantine because they've been in contact with somebody, it doesn't make any difference whether we kept them safe within the school or whether they picked it up at their neighborhood Halloween party. If it still means there's that many adults having to quarantine that the rest of the teachers in our system can't carry the load because they're being asked to do too much, then I can see why we would need to pull back because of that. And that is frustrating, as Susan said. If we're doing what we need to in the schools, and I know we can't control our community members, but in the end, it doesn't matter how we're transmitting it. If we can't keep all the kids in the classrooms with teachers to teach them, then I see the problem there.
What age is your student? What class?
I'm sorry?
What class?
A freshman.
Freshman? Okay.
And then,
Would you,
you know,
that's a different question. I don't know that I need to know that answer, but my point is we're making a distinction between, 3 years or middle, let's say it was 7th grade or 6th grade. So 5th and 6th, what's the difference? I mean, I get back and I understand the movement in class, but, if you're going to elect not to send your child to school, it's going to be not because they're a certain age, it's going to be because you have different concerns. So we're keeping elementary in person where we're not you don't have that choice at the other two.
so I can tell you, because I have a 7th grader too.
Okay.
And I have chose hybrid from the beginning. But I will tell you this, because you've asked me about it, I want to make very clear, I do not sit in the seat making decisions based on my 2 children's experiences. I
not
take
why I
all
asked.
12,000 kids into consideration. So I just want to say that for the community's sake.
Okay.
I did send my 7th grader to school, but part of that was because if I didn't, someone brought it up, I think you did, about the live streaming, he would just miss a day of school. And the mental health part of it, e-learning has been difficult for him. I won't go into details, but it's been a struggle. And he needs to be there. He needs that interaction.
So the younger
But
students.
He went,
yeah, great.
I was hesitant though, but I didn't want him to miss a day of school because the high schoolers have that live stream option. And so the freshman wasn't missing a day of school today. But that's my personal choice.
Yeah, but
It's
you
not-
brought it up. That's why I responded that way. You brought up you didn't send your child to school, so you made that personal, I'm trying to react to it that way. But again, I think that's the bigger issue here, is what's the distinction? And that's really my bigger picture. And again, I don't want to belabor the concept. It is what it is. The percentages are 2.5% both ways.
So let me try to wrap this up. We could talk about this for another
Yeah,
2.5
good.
hours, and we have other things on the agenda tonight. I don't have any magic words that are going to make a horrible situation for everybody. And every school district in the country is going through similar levels of complexity, and I want to start by echoing Susan's comments at the beginning about the tremendous work that you, Dr. Schuler, the team, the teachers, the court, the reopening teams have done to get us to this point. I see and hear about how other communities are treating their superintendents and board members, and I'm so proud of what we've been able to accomplish for our students and our staff, to be able to get them back in school. And, like I said, there's no good answers in any of this, no matter which perspective you look at it, the student's perspective, the parent's perspective, the staff perspective. There's multiple opinions, and it's really, really difficult. But I also think about all that has to happen within the context of a community. We have lots of different communities that are not directly connected to our school district, or community members that are not directly connected to our school district, but they have an impact on what we do and the decisions we make. And we have to think about them too. And so, I mentioned a few weeks ago that I've been watching these numbers daily, and they are going crazy in DuPage County, and it's not getting any better. And I would rather be a little, as much as we've been able to stretch it, I would rather anticipate ahead of time as opposed to react after the fact. And I feel like we're on that pivot point right now. I would love to get through the week of Thanksgiving. That was kind of my aspirational goal, but when you think about it, you see the impact of not only students, but staff. I mean, from the beginning, we've had to, what can we do to continue the operations of the school district? And when you start seeing the impact of teachers and how we're able to backfill those, and this is not an issue just for us. I heard about it yesterday from another school district. Just a number of unfilled substitute positions that are not able to be replaced as teachers have to quarantine for whatever reason. It's a systemic problem at least in education right now, of the people that I talk to. So we can't only think about the students, we also have to think about our ability to deliver instruction in a consistent way. So, there's lots of different, we all have concerns, whether we should go an extra week at the high school, the concerns about the middle school. whether we should stay in at the elementary school. All those concerns are there from the very beginning of this. We've always gotten a very strong recommendation from Dr. Schuler and his team. We've always supported those recommendations as a board. So, you know, I think what I'm hearing is we all have concerns. We want to try to push some additional thinking as we try to think about how we can bring students back and get back to where we are right now. But from my standpoint, I'll support the recommendation, knowing that it's not ideal for anybody, but it's probably the best thing for our entire school community at this moment in time. And we just have to adapt and see where we go over the next couple weeks, and recognizing that, as we said in our communication, you know, at the end of last week, those time period after Thanksgiving and between the holidays is going to be really, really important for our school community, and see what's going to be able to happen. So, there's no really, like I said, there's no magic words to summarize this. It's just really difficult, and I support and think you've done a tremendous job dealing with a really, really difficult situation that is going to make nobody happy. I mean, depending on what perspective you're taking and where the point in time is, it's just really difficult. So that's kind of where I see this situation right now. I'll just leave it at that, I guess, unless anybody has any quick follow-up comments.
What does this do for high school sports?
Well,
Anything?
Yeah, so,
pivot to that.
Yesterday.
yeah, at the beginning of the school year, even as we operated remotely, we've operated any of our extracurricular activities in the confines of what the Illinois Department of Public Health and IHSA have allowed. I would recommend that we continue to do that. So in circumstances where the two entities have jointly approved specific activities, that we would continue to operate those activities consistent with that guidance. So, well, this is not listed as formal action, but I think per, you know, your pandemic policy, as we are shifting perhaps 2 levels to full remote, I do believe that requires board okay to do that, meaning I would recommend at least a straw poll of support.
Can I just ask for one more clarifying question? We are saying we cannot, we are struggling with staffing, and that is our main reason why we're moving? Or are we saying because numbers are rising? Because if we're saying the numbers are rising, it's why aren't we closing all 3? So I guess for me to get my head around why we're closing middle and high school, is it because we can't staff it?
Yes?
Okay, that's what
And case counts are up, so your
Right.
case counts are up at the secondary level. That's all in the context of numbers rising. I agree with you that I think that applies across the entire system, but I think as the numbers are rising, and as you look at certainly that DuPage County framework, where it asks you to then prioritize where in-person instruction can continue, well, I would love to have in-person opportunities continue across the board. If I have to prioritize, I'm going to prioritize in-person at the elementary, the early childhood, and at the transition level, and if it means the additional resources as a result of shifting remote at 2 levels allow us to continue to do that for longer. So I think it's a combination of all of them, Chris. It is rising case numbers, it is staffing concerns and ability to staff, all within the context of the rising numbers. It's also contact tracing, it is our mitigation strategies, and as those numbers have gone up, we're seeing some fissures in some of those mitigation strategies that prove to be a concern. So if numbers were high, and I were to say to you confidently, we can do all of those things, I would recommend we continue. Can't do that confidently.
And it's because we have, at those 3 levels, we want to stay in person. It's more because those are cohorts, where they're not commingling during the day. That's what allows us.
At the elementary level, for sure.
And early childhood and transition. That's what allows us that opportunity. Okay, that's what I needed to.
And that, again, I'll take you all the way back, we recognized that at the beginning of the year, right? The reason you started the in-person opportunity at the elementary
level and at early childhood and at the transition center was the recognition of that model and the cohorted experience in the model and the simplicity of variables. So that's not new, right? We're going back to a model that we recognize from the start was notably different than the secondary model.
Well, and didn't we, going way back to the first guidance we ever got, weren't we being given the message that we should be prioritizing our youngest learners as well, up until a certain age, which I think probably would take it into the middle school if we could do it, but
Correct.
certainly prioritizes the early learning in the elementary school students.
And special populations.
Yep.
So, let me try to go around the table here. We have a recommendation from Dr. Schuler, representative of all the feedback he's received from our leaders in the district and the staff that are implementing the plan and the day-to-day operations. I guess, knowing that there's lots of different opinions, we'll just go around the table in the same order. Do you support the plan as recommended? Susan?
I support, I do have some concerns, like I said, at the elementary level, but overall, I do support it.
Dave?
I support it.
Jim?
Yeah, I'd prefer that we waited another week, and I'd prefer that we, continue to provide choice to the parents and students. But in the big picture, when we look at all the aspects of it, whether it be instruction, all the pieces of it, I have to support the administration's choice only because they have, more in-depth information about some of those pieces. And I hope that we can continue with in-person in the elementary level, and I'm disappointed that we cannot continue it at the other two at this point. But hopefully we will be able to continue at the elementary level, because I think that's where the biggest need is.
Jenna?
Yeah, I definitely support it. I support that you guys have, like he said, have the information even more than what we can possibly go over in an evening, and so I definitely support whatever you guys think is what you need to do.
Chris?
Yeah, and I do appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and I think my tipping point was looking at the unfilled positions, the staffing. To me, that's a really key piece, so I will support.
And I do as well. And I'll just kind of say that, of course, as we have from the beginning, we would love to get back to where we are right now as soon as possible, and we need everybody's help on that. Not just the people that work for the school district or go to school here. It's everybody outside. We need your help. So there you go. Did we finish the IHSA update? There was some news, I think, that we anticipate coming out.
Yeah, so IHSA sent an email out earlier today to all of the member schools. They recently took a poll of their schools inquiring about participation in basketball. So just by way of summary, you've got conflicting guidance between IHSA and IDPH in terms of the upcoming basketball season. The email from IHSA today indicated that they would be meeting again, I believe on the 19th, to try to work out that conflicting guidance. I think in the email that came out today, IHSA encouraged any schools that would even be considering the start of basketball to still adhere to those IDPH guidelines until the 19th, when some clarity was brought. So in short, the Duquesne Conference, the Board of Control of the conference has indicated that until such time as that guidance is reconciled between IDPH and IHSA, they're not recommending moving forward with a competitive season, that any contact happen within the confines of allowable rules for the activity. So the IDPH has provided guidance for a number of our contact sports that have had the ability to do training in contact days. So long and the short of it is we are awaiting additional clarification before we would consider any moving forward.
And when you're speaking in terms of the conference, we're talking about six other high schools and
6
five.
other school districts, 8 high schools total.
Yeah, outside of us, it's
Six
six
high
other
schools
high
outside
schools
us,
and
yeah.
5 other school districts.
Correct.
That are kind of impacted by those recommendations.
Yep. And again, I want to just say at the onset, as the school reopening decisions, right, it pains me to be in a spot of ultimately, having to attempt to wait out conflicting guidance from 2 state agencies, but it would be unwise for the school district to move forward until that's reconciled.
Okay, thank you for that short oral report. Next on our agenda tonight, we have 3 action items. The first one is the adoption of the 2020 levy. This is something we have to do, I believe, by the end of the year, but we have it on our agenda tonight. So Dr. Schuler, I think we have an update from Mr. Farley.
Do. Mr. Farley's joining us at the podium, and he's going to provide the board with a levy update. The Finance Committee reviewed this levy presentation at a recent meeting, so go ahead, Mr. Farley.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. As President Paulson mentioned, this is an annual process for our tax levy. I'd like to start out, as I do every year, just with some context on some of the key terms that I'm going to be discussing throughout the presentation. The first, the property tax extension limitation law, or tax caps as it's more commonly referred to, came into being in the early 1990s in DuPage County. It is in a number of counties throughout the state, not all, but is in DuPage, and it limits the amount that this Board of Education can request on an annual basis to the CPI, which is put out annually. We find out each January what it'll be for the upcoming levy year. So we found out in January of 2020 what our CPI would be for this levy presentation tonight. We're capped to 5% or the CPI. The CPI has never gone over 5%. Since this law came into effect back in 1992. The Consumer Price Index, the index that is used is a price level of market basket of consumer goods. It's put out by the Department of Labor each month, and that's a number that we track month to month and report out. Equalized assessed valuation, or EAV, is the property wealth of the school district. And then finally, the tax rate, which is the amount that is stated per $100 of EAV. All of these terms will come up as we go through the presentation. A little bit more about the CPI. Again, it comes out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It measures changes in price over time for goods and services. It's a month-to-month index that's indexed year over year. So the October CPI came out for 2020, and it's the percentage that's increased over the October of 2019 CPI. And again, we track that. The correlation relative to how that index moves is not always necessarily correlating to how our school districts operate. The price of gasoline often will impact the CPI as it goes up and down. So that we've seen that in the past. A little bit of a history. You can see the 10-year history on the CPI, and it has been somewhat of a roller coaster over the last 3 years. It's been averaging about 2.1%. Over the last 5 years, it's been about 1.8%, and over the last 10 years, it's been about 1.7%, or a little bit over that. So more recently, it's been a little bit more static and predictable, whereas in prior years, it was going up and down. Equalized assessed valuation, again, this is the property wealth of the school district. You can see going back to 2010, there was a TIF that ended in that year, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but you can see as the recession, impact of the recession, you can see our property wealth of our school district started to decline, and then starting in 2015, we started to see an uptick where property value wealth within the school district started to increase again, and within the last couple of years, we've exceeded where we were as far as EAV was back in 2010 as the Great Recession took hold. The district is made up of 3 different townships that evaluate the equalized assessed valuation of the school district, the largest being Milton Township. About 84% of our school district is encompassed in Milton Township. 14% is in Winfield Township, and 2% is in Naperville Township. Those township assessors set the property wealth of the different properties throughout the townships that impact our school district. Our description of our EAV, what is our, what type of properties do we have within our school district? We're at almost 79% homes, so rooftops in the district, a very small amount of farm. Commercial makes up a little over 17%. 3.9% is industrial, and less than 1/10% is on railroad. New growth, new construction is important as we do this levy process, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts the tax levy and why we don't levy right at the CPI on an annual basis. New construction, as you can see, back in 2010, I mentioned a TIF that had ended, a tax increment financing district. Back in 2010 was the Cantera TIF that came back onto the tax rolls, and that year that obviously was a significant year as that property came onto the tax rolls for the first time. When new growth and new construction comes on the tax rolls, it is outside of the tax cap, so we need to levy more to capture that, and that is, again, the variable that, again, I'll talk a little bit more about it. You can see in 2016 and 17, we had some blips in there as some TIF 1 in Wheaton ended, and a Carroll Stream TIF expired as well. So as those properties came on the tax rolls as new construction, we captured that property as well. Anytime new growth comes onto the property taxes, that's good for all of us because that spreads out the impact of taxes in the community onto that new property as well. And when it's a TIF, that property is frozen and the money is going to the TIF, not necessarily to the taxing bodies until the end of the TIF, which is 23 years generally. Forecasting out, this is a slide that Mr. Matheson had thought would be important for the board to see, kind of illustrates where we think we see new construction over the next 5 years. New construction is always an estimate. We do get information from our assessors with some estimates of what the new growth will be, but we don't always know the exact number when we do this tax levy. So this year we're anticipating using $20 million, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means financially to the school district in a minute. Next year there is some growth in the south part of the district that we see coming. If you've been by Bauer Elementary School on River Road there's a significant development that's going in there, and there's other properties that are being developed, so we're monitoring that. In 2022, TIF 2 in Wheaton will be expiring, and that property will then come on the tax roll. So that'll be, again, probably not quite as big as Cantera, but a significant amount of property that will be coming back onto the tax rolls for the school district, and the district will have to levy accordingly for that. And then we see the levy, the new growth kind of level back off to what we see on average over time. So TIF 2, again, will be ending in 2022. I think the next TIF that will come off will be in 2028, and that's TIF 3 in Wheaton, unless the city chooses to end that one early. So this next slide just illustrates the blue line you can see is the consumer price index. Again, that's what we're limited to by the tax cap, and the red line is what the district actually received as part of its aggregate extension. The delta between those two is the impact of new construction in the school district, and again, we levy accordingly to try and make sure that we're above that red line, so we are capturing the new growth along with the impact of the tax cap or the consumer price index. So our levy extensions, when we get to that slide, we'll talk about, we always levy more than the CPI to make sure that we capture the new growth, knowing that we're not going to get all of what that extension request is. Talk a little bit more about EAV, the CPI, and the tax rate. In times where the EAV is rising, as it was back prior to the Great Recession and since 2015, when the equalized assessed valuation of the school district is going up, the tax rate in the school will go down. That's true for any taxing body. And then when EAV dips, as it did after the Great Recession, you start to see the tax rate go up, and that occurred between 2010 and 2014. Again, we are limited to the CPI for our increase regardless of what happens with the valuation of property within our school district. This next slide is a 5-year history of the tax rates in the school district, and you can see over the last 5 years when that EAV was rising, our tax rate has gone from $5.31 down to $4.86. And this is just a chart that illustrates what that looks like based on the different funds within the tax levy process, and obviously the education fund is the largest, but you can see the overall tax rates have come down over time. Moving into our 2019, our prior year levy, just for some information, our breakdown, a little over $141 million of our levy is for operational dollars. Those are the day-to-day costs of paying salaries, benefits, operating our buildings, transportation, the IMRF Social Security Fund, those types of things. The remaining part of the levy, or about 13%, is a little over almost $21 million is related to debt taxes. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute, but that's the payment of principal and interest on our outstanding debt in the school district. This chart illustrates what our debt service looks like for the next 5-6 years in the school district. And again, this is after phase 4, where the board recalls we had a 4-phase process to restructure and refinance our debt at savings to the school district and to the taxpayers, as well as to restructure a ramp that was built into the the prior debt schedule. And you can see this is the last year where we're just over $20 million for our debt service. It drops off to just under $19 million for the next couple of years, drops down to a little over $15 million, and then $14 million, and then by 2025, the district would no longer have any outstanding debt. I wanted to talk a little bit, too, about our Sherman-Durgis funding, because this comes into play as we talk about our fund balance. As the board recalls, the chart on the left illustrated how we are going to fund the $7.2 million that we have set aside since the failure of the referendum and the board's desire to put as much funding available to our capital projects. And we instituted this 4-year plan for how we were going to pay for that, with a ramp up of operating fund usage as well as some fund balance. And we've updated that chart for the Board of Education. On the right, you can see we did increase the amount of fund balance we were using this year based on the desire to instill some contingency money related to COVID-related expenditures. So the model changed a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit here in a minute about fund balance and why we were able to do that. The plan is still to go back and put more operating funds, and by the time we get to FY23, we would be paying for all of the $7.2 million for capital projects out of our operating funds and without the use of fund balance. This chart illustrates our fund balance history. You can see over the time that the board has committed fund balance to projects. We have been able to build our fund balance. We're just under 34%, or just over 34%, 34.2% at current. And you can see which funds have that money, that fund balance for the community. And a reminder for the Board of Education, we have a fund balance policy that is consistent with the Illinois State Board of Education financial profile model that indicates that we want to have somewhere between 25 and 40% of fund balance. We're at 34% right now. Very important that we stay within that range for cash flow purposes, as well as our ability to fund capital projects, which is identified in that fund balance policy, that any funds within that range can be used while we continue to monitor our fund balance. Our audit is going to be brought to the board next month, and I think we'll have some positive information on fund balance and how we ended the year last year. So I think we can continue to fund the capital projects as identified moving forward. So how is our extension calculated, and how do we arrive at the levy request that we're asking the board to approve tonight? As mentioned prior, our aggregate levy was just over 141 million last year. We are limited by the CPI of 2.3%, so you can see the math there. What our extension would be if there was no new growth in the district, we would be at a little over $144.3 million. However, we do levy to make sure we capture that new growth. Every $1 million of new growth is about $42,000. And you can see, I mentioned our 2020 debt service is $20.7 million for this year. So our tax extension, this is our request for our aggregate extension, and you can see the number in green over there is 3.99%. So when you look at the 2.3% that we are limited to by the tax cap, we're asking for 3.99%, which means we are trying to capture any new growth. Again, that number isn't known for sure at this time, so we do levy higher to make sure that we capture that new growth as it comes back on the tax rolls. Our overall debt service levy is about 1% lower than the previous year. So overall, it's a 0.35% increase, but our overall aggregate levy increase request for our operational costs is 3.99%. Some considerations, the ability to access the CPI and new growth is included in our 2021 budget. As I mentioned, we want to capture that new construction and new growth that comes onto the tax rolls. There's uncertainty around state funding. Obviously, the proposal that was on the constitutional proposal that was on the ballot failed, and the governor has already has talked about cuts and indicated that there could be cuts in the area of education. So I think that's a factor that we have to take into account. Just as a reminder, the state held us harmless this year with our funding. There was no reduction. We were kept flat, so that was good news. We hope that we see all those funds this year, but you never know with the state. So again, we obviously rely on local funding as well. So the uncertainties around state funding obviously is a consideration as well. And finally, just the funding of capital projects identified in our capital plan as we continue to ramp up our operational spend towards that $7.2 million. The ability to capture everything under the tax cap and new growth is vital to the continuation of that program. So our levy request tonight, which provides us access to PTEL, allowed of the CPI plus new growth, again, 3.99% aggregate increase, knowing we won't get that percentage. We will capture the CPI and then any new growth, and we believe we have enough in our levy request to make sure that we capture any new growth. So with that, I went through it rather quickly. I will answer any questions the Board of Education may have. As Dr. Schuler mentioned, we did run through this with the Finance Committee and bring the recommendation to the full board tonight.
First off, any comments from the Finance Committee?
Yeah, basically, number one, the Finance Committee, Mr. Long and I are the Finance Committee, and we met and we asked a lot of questions about this, and I can say that at the end product of this, we understand it and would recommend that the board approve this levy. I think we've done very well over the last number of years in controlling our budget, getting our debt in order, and the fund balance future under the Sherman-Durgis. If we look at the year that we're fully funding that out of operations, it coincides with the year in which the TIF in downtown Wheaton goes away, which is creating the dollars to help fund that out of operations going forward. So, we've come a long ways in the last number of years to get this under control. So, Dave, do you have any other questions or comments?
I don't have anything to add.
Any other comments or questions from board members? All right. I'll just underscore kind of this third bullet point under consideration is just the uncertainty in the future of the state and how important it is to think beyond just right now and think about what might be ahead of us over the next couple of years as the state wrestles with the challenges that they have and how that might impact us. So I definitely support the request as presented. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the resolution and certificates for the 2020 tax levy as presented, and that the certificate of tax levy be executed and that all forms be filled with the county clerk? Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Long, seconded by Mr. Matheson. Mr. Hanlon, would you call the roll?
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Ms. Erickson?
Yes.
Ms. Crabtree?
Yes.
Ms. Wooten?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon, yes. Mr. Paulson?
Yes. Okay, the adoption of the 2020 levy has been approved as presented. Thank you, Mr. Farley. Number 2, our second action item tonight is approval of a resolution authorizing commencement of a vaping litigation and attorney-client fee contract. Dr. Schuler?
For the board, a little bit of background on this litigation effort. So Franzik, who is one of the 2 attorney firms that the district works with for especially a lot of our business services, is involved in this litigation effort. And just a couple of quick comments of what it is. So it's not a class action suit. It is a multi-district litigation. Difference between that is that this is not a small group representing a large group. Each of these are individual cases focused on the same entity, and what a federal judge has done is consolidated all of them into basically one case, even though each individual does not lose their case. The target of this litigation is Juul Laboratories, which is not just Juul the company, but a number of affiliated groups that were a part of the rise in the vaping epidemic that candidly schools, as many other institutions now are responding to. And so the goal or the reason for participating in this would be for school districts to recapture some funds that would support our ongoing response effort, our ongoing prevention efforts toward vaping, or our ongoing mitigation efforts toward vaping. And again, as other school districts are, so there is not a cost to participate in this litigation. So the attorney taking this on a contingency fee. So only funds are recouped out of the litigation would attorney fees be paid. The district is potentially recouping some cost. In terms of potential timeline, I've been told that the target would be to hope to get these early 2020. So hopefully actually see some of those funds to support our efforts moving forward. So I've spent quite a bit of time with Mr. Farley and the Franzik team, making sure that we understood this. There are a number of our local partner school districts, LUDA districts, that are involved in this and have vetted this out as well, and I would recommend to the board that you approve the resolution authorizing commencement of the litigation and the attorney-client fee contract.
Any questions or comments from board members? The only question I had is, do we have to document and present what our cost impact has been?
Really, the cost to us is not financial. The cost is going to be staff time to do that. So yes, we will have to put together where our time around prevention and response has come from, which again is a couple of places. You heard a presentation at the last committee of the whole meeting from our new emotional wellness coordinators. Our emotional wellness coordinators are not only supporting students transitioning back from emotional behavioral wellness institutions, are supporting students that may be transitioning back from rehabilitation institutions as well. And so everything from the work that they do to the work of our counselors and our deans, if we consider moving forward any type of vape detection devices in our schools, all would be supported out of this, but we will have to document that.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the resolution authorizing commencement of the vaping litigation and attorney-client fee contract as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Crabtree,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Erickson. Mr. Hanlon, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Crabtree?
Yes.
Ms. Erickson?
Yes.
Ms. Booten?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon? Yes. Mr. Paulson?
Yes. Okay, the action item to approve the resolution authorizing commencement of vaping litigation and the attorney-client fee contract has been approved as presented. And finally, number 3 is approval of a revised 2020-2021 school calendar. Dr. Schuler?
An item that we had previewed for the board, I think maybe a meeting or even 2 meetings ago, but this is the official change to this year's calendar that shifts the end of the first semester to January the 28th. That also shifts that Workday Institute Day that sits right at the end of the first semester to the 29th. So the practical impact for families is that there's a day of non-student attendance that shifts down to the 29th of January, which is right after the end of the first semester.
So this doesn't change the end date, it just balances the 2 semesters?
Does not change the end date of the school year, yes, it just balances the 2 semesters by moving that first semester date back 2 weeks.
Okay. Questions or comments from board members?
Just to understand, in June, the end, would be the 11th thereafter, that those are snow days or emergency days?
Those are emergency days if, in fact, we took a snow day. But given our propensity for virtual remote learning, I'm not so sure we'll need to take snow days, but.
Okay. So we've kind of made up, we started later. Back in August, we were going to start, and now we're here, so we've extended it? Is that, we have?
You haven't extended the end, no.
Okay.
Well, you did when the original calendar amendment went in,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, that's
So
fine.
I'm sorry, this is actually the second calendar amendment that
Okay.
you've done. You did one when we moved the start date of school back to September the 1st. That did extend the end of the school year. This change, though, is not changing the end
Okay,
of
so
the school,
June 10th is the end, is
Correct.
more or less the end of school. Thank you.
end of the school year.
If we are back in school and we have a snow day, we would be able to go remote? So we wouldn't have,
We would have that option this year.
and do you see, moving forward, hopefully next school year, we're out of this? Do you see that same flexibility now that we have this experience?
Yeah, I hope so. That's actually one of the conversations that, even amid the pandemic, that we've already started to have with some of our legislative partners, is recognizing some of the flexibility that's actually come during the pandemic that we'd actually like to see stay, right, extend beyond it. It's available only this year with remote learning days that are available, but I would like to see that extend beyond as some of the flexibility around learning model.
Okay, can I have a motion and a second to approve the revised 2020-2021 calendar as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Long,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Booten. Mr. Hanlon, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Ms. Booten?
Yes.
Ms. Erickson?
Yes.
Ms. Crabtree?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon, yes. Mr. Paulson?
Yes. Okay, the approval of the revised 2020-21 calendar, school calendar has been approved as presented. That concludes our action items. We have one discussion item tonight, which is where we need to wrap up our discussion around the IASB resolutions and directions for our delegate. Just to kind of quickly summarize for the group, we have supported items 5, 6, and 7, although we did decide at the last meeting that we hadn't had a chance to hear again from Chris on that topic. We were against items 1, 3, and 8, and that we wanted to have some continued discussion over 2 and 4. First off, before we get into that, Susan, I think you had another webinar that was there any new information that came out of that?
Not really. I mean, there was this kind of the same kind of discussion on number 2, a lot of support for it. And it was just similar from last time. The people who were, or districts who were opposed to it just felt more in the realm of it's going too much into the home instead of being in the school. But a lot of districts did come out in supporting it, and I think I mentioned last time, there is this House Bill 2254 that addresses gun storage, and a woman actually reached out to one of the sponsors of that bill, and that they do feel it will move forward in the new session, and I think, you know, this was part of my rationale for supporting it, and Naperville 203 said this too, that what this does is tells IASB you should put your support behind this bill. And there was discussion back and forth about whether, you know, well, IASB shouldn't be putting a lot of resources into this and everything, and, you know, a few districts commented, well, they're not really putting resources into it. It's more like this House bill, if the, you know, if the state representatives and, you know, House and Senate come to IASB and say, what do you think of this bill? And it says, well, we support, you know, we're saying to them, IASB would say, we support this type of legislation. And so, you know, the argument was that it's not a ton of resources from IASB.
Number 4?
Wait, before we leave 2, what is the recommendation of the or the School Board Association at this point?
The recommendation from IASB was do not adopt.
Okay, so we're voting to agree with do not?
No,
Or,
we're voting whether we agree with the resolution.
Yeah.
Support the resolution or not support it. IASB Delegate Assembly is
Got it.
just recommending a do
Not
not
to.
adopt.
okay.
So let's just cover 2 since we're on it.
Yeah. I
So
think
we had a
Good.
discussion last time. My notes were that Dave and Jim were opposed to it, Susan and Rob were supportive. We didn't hear from Chris and Jenna.
Do not adopt.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So basically you don't want to support it. Okay, you're opposed.
That's where I stood from our first conversation as well.
So we're opposed.
Okay. Dave, where are you on this item?
I am opposed. And again, I mean, it's more for exactly what Susan said in terms of where we should be recommending our IASB resources be focused, and I'm not suggesting that I'm anti-gun safety. I just kind of feel it's a little bit of overreach to be advocating for gun storage in the homes,
Okay.
in the schools.
Jeb?
If I have this clear, I am agreeing with the IASB, or
Correct.
the School Board Association, and not recommending that
Disregard the recommendation. Do you agree with the resolution or not?
I do not.
Okay. And Chris?
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Susan? Because I think you mentioned this, I don't know, we've talked about this so many times, that there are other resolutions that do go out of the scope of the school day. Am I right in saying that IASB has supported in the past? So this was not an unusual request?
I will be honest and say a couple districts brought that up, that they said this is not the only time you've gone out of our school buildings. I cannot give you those examples. They did not provide examples of what those were. Someone, I think, mentioned railroads, but then someone said, but children are on the bus who cross the railroad. And I agree with that, with that rationale there, that we talk about railroads because there's school children crossing the railroad that will enter our building. So, again, other districts said that there are other examples, but they did not provide what those examples are. And I'll be honest, I didn't go through all the resolutions to see what that would be. But, yeah, I mean, it's getting late. I've said my piece on this. I strongly support it. But I think enough of us don't support it that the recommendation is opposed.
I just want to be clear. So forget what the recommendation is. Rob is opposed to the resolution.
Correct.
Dave is opposed to the resolution. Jim and Jenna are opposed to the resolution. Okay.
I would
Just-
be then opposed to the
You would
resolution.
be opposed? Okay. Just for the record, I would support it.
I do have one point, and I thought it was interesting. You said something a little different this time. And I'm curious what the language was on the call, which was, well, it doesn't mean that IASB is going to put their resources behind it. They're just going to render an opinion, which is very different than how I've always understood the process. So I'm curious who brought that up.
So, I can see if I...
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, I have it here. I think Naperville 204 said it.
Okay.
And Naperville 203.
All right. So it's their interpretation. It's
So
IASB can come out and say it.
Yeah, so some people said that we should, and you can't do that this year, but maybe next year it comes back as a belief statement.
Got it, okay.
And then that way, it's not, if the legislature comes to them and says, what do you think of this? They say, we do believe in safe gun storage. And then it's not necessarily something that lobbying dollars goes behind. So maybe we'll see this again coming back as a belief statement as opposed to a resolution.
Very helpful, thank you.
Pardon me?
Very helpful.
Okay. The other one was number 4 regarding pre-K teacher licensure.
I thought we decided that one.
We did. I just want to clarify
Okay.
where we are. So we are not supportive of the resolution, but if the submitting district agreed with the proposed revised language, we would support it. That was the one where the submitting district rejected the alternate language proposed by the delegate assembly. That's what I remember from that. So we were opposed to the
Correct.
resolution, but if it came back with the alternate language, we would support it.
Correct.
Okay. And then number 5, which is our last one, as it relates to teacher, the shortage, the consensus we had, I believe the first time was we were not going to support it, but we wanted to give Chris another option.
And I changed my mind on that one, too. When we had our discussion last time. One thing I want to say quickly is that, I don't know who it was, but somebody did pull number 5 off of the consent agenda, which means that, because the consent agenda is what they do is they put all the do-adopt resolutions on the consent agenda, and it's just like we do, it's one fell swoop. But if you pull it, any district can pull something off the consent agenda, and so that is, to me, there's probably another district out there who supports this, who does not support it, and they want a separate vote on it. However, there was not a lot of discussion on it, although the presenting district was on this call. I don't believe they were on the first call, and I presented your point again, and he was very nice, and he agreed with it, but he felt they're in a more rural district, and he said, but it is better to have a teacher with a provisional license than no teacher at all. And I'm not saying I agree with that, that's just what he said. So, but it did get pulled off the consent agenda, which I thought was interesting.
Do you want to recap it for everybody?
Yeah, so if I'm remembering correctly, this is where they give a provisional license for 5 years, which could be extended up to 10 years. for certain subject areas. My rationale was, it minimizes the role of the education that our teachers have when we do that. I understand for these rural areas, but I'm sorry, if you can't get your license in 10 years, are you that devoted to be able to really wanting to be a teacher in that area? And so I don't support it.
And I agree with Chris after that first discussion when, you talked, and I remember I texted you when I got home, and I'm like, you're right. And the part in this, though, is that I think before it was for certain areas, and now what this resolution is saying that it will be for all curricular areas. And so to your point, you were like, there could be a math teacher, like the core subjects and not the specialty subjects that I think this was originally for.
Special education is one of them that they highlighted, if I remember correctly, in there, and that really concerns me.
Yeah.
Okay, Jenna, how do you feel about it?
I'm happy not recommending it.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm happy not recommending it.
So you're opposed to it?
Yes.
Okay. Jim?
What's the position of the School Board Association?
To adopt.
To adopt.
But it's been pulled off the consent agenda to take a separate vote.
Okay. So they're recommending adopting, and we're disagreeing with that if we oppose it.
Correct.
Okay.
So right now,
I agree with the IASB.
so you will support it?
Yeah.
Dave?
I'll oppose.
Oppose? Rob? Doesn't matter.
I do not support.
Do not support, okay. And then I'm the same way, so I'm opposed as well. So we're going to change our tune to that one, so
Yep.
for number 5, we're going to flip to supporting it to opposing it.
Yep.
So just as a recap, the direction we've given Susan to vote at the delegate assembly is against. We oppose numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with that caveat on number 4. We are supportive of number 6 and 7, and we are opposed number 8 because 8 and number 7 are pretty similar. And then for the reaffirmation of existing positions, number 9, 10, and 11, we are supportive, as well as the new belief statement, number 12, we're supportive of that too.
Yes.
I have all this written down. I'm sure you
got it.
have it too. So,
Yep. I got it.
All right,
Yeah,
you-
so the
you-
delegate assembly is Saturday.
Yes. So you have your direction from the board, how to vote. Thank you again for all the time you put into this and trying to learn the process, and interesting to see how it all goes next week. So that ends our discussion items. We have 3 written reports attached to our agenda tonight. The first is the monthly financial report. Second is a FOIA report, and the third, the board communication log. These are provided for information. Any questions from board members on those? Okay, hearing none, we are now on reports from board members. There was one committee report attached. That was the Finance Committee. I think we've pretty much covered all of that. Any other questions about board committee meetings from the board? Okay, other reports from board members. I do have one. I just wanted to follow up on the discussion we had about the Student Excellence Foundation board meetings. If you recall, we had kind of an alternating schedule set up with them last year. We're going to continue that. I had reached out to the board members individually, and right now we have 4 dates on the docket. So this coming Monday, November 16th, Chris, if you can still make it, that'd be great. We had targeted Jenna for January 18th with the caveat that that date might change because of MLK Day. March 15th, Susan. And I'll push this out to everybody. And then back in May 17th, Dave.
What's the date in May?
May 17th. I'm sure I'll get confirmation from the Student Excellence
that's fine.
Foundation Board as we move forward. Some of those are stretched pretty far out, but I'll communicate that to the board and then to the team on the Student Excellence Foundation as well. Any other reports from board members?
Yeah, I went to the city council in Warrenville to receive the proclamation for school boards, and it was a very nice meeting, and it was virtual, by the way, and the mayor said hello.
And I did the same thing for the city of Wheaton, representing us, and they were in person. It's kind of nice. They also, I guess, hired, I don't know if that's the official term, 3 new police officers for the city of Wheaton, so they're much more important than us.
I have one quick thing. So Dave and I attended, I don't even know what we're calling it now, a Winfield community meeting where all groups within Winfield, whether it be school district, park district, got together, and even Northwestern Medicine was there, the village of Winfield. We have agreed to work quarterly, Dave, I believe it is?
I think so. They were going to kind of reassess that
Yeah.
after the first of the year.
Just to be able to, our small little community happens to have 4 main school districts that serve it, and so trying to pull together, are there things that we can do efficiently together to be able to help the community? So we met, and we'll be meeting again in January.
Okay?
And just quickly, in addition to that, the Equity Task Force met last week. It was the same time as the DuPage, I forget what you call it.
IASB.
Yeah, the IASB.
DuPage Division
I
Dinner.
did get to watch some of your presentation while we were doing the Equity Task Force, but we continue to make progress on that with the Equity Task Force, and I think coming up with some action items. And also, I didn't say in the discussion, but I too want to recognize all of the effort and work, that Dr. Schuler, the administrative team, the teachers have put into this, and I always forget to say that when I'm asking my questions and talking about that, but a lot of respect, and and I also appreciate all of the community feedback, especially the ones that are constructive. I do wish people would be a little kinder sometimes in some of their words, because I think we all are compassionate, open to a lot of opinions, and really don't deserve the kind of attack some people choose to give, but that's their prerogative. I don't take it personally, but there's a lot of them that are pretty strong, but they're respectful, and that's always a little easier to read.
For those comments. Next up on our agenda is topics for future discussion, which is the 2019-20 audit. So I just have 2 personal requests. Jim, it would be wonderful again if you give us a little Cliff Notes version of what to look for. That's so helpful.
Okay.
And then to Dr. Schuler, the earlier you can get us that document, even if a couple days would be helpful in advance of the Friday release of that agenda. Yeah. We have no other announcements planned for tonight. Our next meeting, as we've talked about earlier tonight, is December 9th, again at 7 o'clock at Hubble Middle School. No other public comments for non-agenda items, so there being no further action to come before the board in open session, can I have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Crabtree,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Erickson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.